Welcome to the Six Bridges Presents Olly Neal.
All right, is it my turn? All right, I'm Ernie Dumas. Let's get the introductions out of the way first. I presume everyone who's tuned in knows pretty much who Judge Neal is and was, but anyway, I'll try to distill his life down to a minute or so, which is hard to do for a guy who in 50 years went from pariah to hero, depending upon your point of view. Judge, you can correct me if I'm off a little bit on some of this stuff, but Olly was born in 1941 out in rural Lee County, a dozen or so miles from that giant statue of Robert E. Lee on the town square, which is still sitting there in Marianna. His grandfather was born a slave in Mississippi. He had 12 brothers and sisters. His daddy, also Olly, but spelled with I-E, I think, was a farmer a good part of his life, maybe a tenant farmer or a sharecropper for a while. And they later moved to Marianna, where he finished high school and went into the Army for a couple of years, including a stint in Vietnam. Then he came back home, crossed the river over to Memphis, went to college, and got a degree in chemistry. What was that all about, Olly? We'll talk to you about that later. And then he got into a little troublemaking at Memphis and clashed with the law over there, I think, a few times. And then came back to Marianna to run a medical clinic, a Vista project that was started by Jan Reed, of course, who was responsible for this memoir largely. The Lee County Cooperative Clinic. And that's when the rest of Arkansas began to hear about Olly Neal, who you gathered was terrifying all the white folk over in the Delta. And it became a giant political issue that year for the governor of Arkansas. And the governor, Dale Bumpers at the time, had to resolve that crisis as best he could. For a couple of years, there was racial strife in Arkansas that had once been centered in Little Rock, moved to little Lee County in East Arkansas. And then after that, we'll spend a lot of time on that. Then Olly went to law school, got a law degree, got into politics unsuccessfully for a few years, but then finally getting elected prosecuting attorney. In fact, the first Black prosecuting attorney elected in Arkansas history, a circuit judge, and for more than a decade, a judge on the second highest court in the state, the Arkansas Court of Appeals. And he might have been the first Black elected appellate judge in history. I'm not sure about that, Judge. You can correct me about that if I'm wrong. Now, I guess, what am I doing here? I'm Ernie Dumas, and Olly and I are sort of contemporaries. I'm a few years older than he is, but we were both raised in the segregated Arkansas about the same time, rural South Arkansas, rural East and South Arkansas. The only difference really was that I was the beneficiary of white privilege and Olly was one of its victims. And in 1971, when he was scaring the daylights out of the people over there by running that clinic for poor people, I was covering state government and politics from the Arkansas State Capitol for the Arkansas Gazette. And I covered those battles, or at least from the governor's end of that battle in 1971, 72, and I guess over into 73. So I have a little bit of knowledge from that era, which I may share from time to time. So anyway, I think we've got, Judge, I think we've got something around 150 people or so tuned in here. I didn't know you had that many friends or that many enemies. But anyway, let's start going back to the first, to that childhood. And you were one of 13 children out there in rural Lee County. Tell me a little bit more about that household, growing up in that household in particular. when you became, or at what point you became aware of the social status that Black people were in, and what and when did you get radicalized? Certainly not from childhood.
Well, first I think it was 30. I have 12 brothers and sisters. 5 of them were not raised. My dad had 5 children before he met my mother, and so my 5 oldest brothers and sisters all lived apart. We visited each other. They visited my dad, and so I saw them and knew them during my childhood. But I was raised in a house with 7 siblings, and so that's the first thing. The second thing is I don't think I was radicalized because I think my mama and my dad had taught us that that we couldn't afford to be radicalized. That is, we couldn't afford to show any signs of resistance. But I think I began to notice things very early. I started to school at 5 years old in 1946. Part of the reason why, and I don't want to tell you that all the world was pressing on me and I was a perfect angel, because I was far from that. Part of the reason why my mother started me in school at 5 is because she had to go to work in the mornings, and when she left me at home, the kinds of things I'd get into just created all kinds of problems for her. So she decided to take me to school with her when I was 5 years old. So, and the first thing I noticed when I finally convinced her to let me walk with the boys, she always left for school early. We were 2.5 miles from the school. She left early. I had to leave with her for a long time. And then finally she let me start walking with the boys, which is all that was a wonderful thing for me. But very early in that, I noticed that from time to time in the afternoon, we'd be coming home, school bus would come by, and generally you didn't pay as much attention because it just came by and went on about its business. But 1 or 2 times, for some reason, the bus either hit some water or hit some gravel. Those roads were primarily dirt, but there were some gravel spots, and sort of rocked us or sprayed us. And I would get mad, and I said, I mean, I was learning to curse even at 5 and 6, because that's what my older brothers could do, and some of the other boys who were walking with us, the neighbors. So I learned to call. I want to know what the hell some bitch is doing to us. And so
this was
very
a
early.
Marianna school district, right?
Well, this was actually Monroe School District.
Monroe, okay.
So the Lee County had several school districts. They had a Monroe District, which was second only to Marianna, but it also had an Aubrey District, a Rondo District, a Brickage District. And we were in the Monroe District. There were 3 other little Black schools in the Monroe District that were 2-room schools like mine. New Hope is where was my school, Springfield, and Fredonia. Fredonia was a school that was closest to Monroe. Monroe had that regular school in the little town of Monroe, and that's why they were bused into there. All those schools were sort of scattered about, and we walked through. I had another experience when I was about 5 or 6. I was going to walking to church with the big boys, which I enjoyed doing, and a little white boy come out and grabbed my tie and said, "I got your tie, you little bastard." And because I had these big boys around me, my confidence was full. I knocked him down. Well, he was about my size, so he was not a big boy. I don't want to tell you I was super strong, but his daddy, and they were really as poor as we were, are poor. It was one of the 2 families living in the general neighborhood that were white and that were poor or at least as poor as any of us. But his dad said, "You shouldn't have been out there messing with him anyway." And so then I thought, all you got to do is stand up. Well, and everything will be kind of equal, because I was used to fighting with the Black boys too. So that was all made it kind of, I kind of got the notion that maybe it's all right. Then something happened in 49 when my brother Thaddeus, who was 8 years older than me, was a freshman in high school, and I was in Marianna with him and Daddy, and we were walking along the street, and we met this young lady who looked like a white girl. Thad said, "Hi, George," and Daddy knocked him off the sidewalk. Her name was Georgia Carolyn Bush, and I told her this story. She's deceased now, but I told her this story before she died. Daddy thought Thad was speaking to a white girl, and so that reminded me again, wrestling with this stuff about how careful you got to be with these white people. And then, of course, in 54, when I was about 13, 55, when I was 14, Emmett Till was killed, and that was a long discussion about how we've got to be very careful about not doing anything to create the anger of the white men in the community, because they would get together and come on you. And from that point, from the Emmett Till death, I mean, I had a kind of an anger building. And I acknowledge that it was there. I had a kind of anger building because I just didn't, I just couldn't, I just didn't, it just didn't make sense to me. But that was my child. Those were the events in my childhood that sort of shaped my thinking on the issue of race. My dad and mama were very strong about going to school, and I think probably any saving grace I had, if I had any, was I would work hard and take on assignments that dad and mama gave me. Some that were probably beyond what I ought to have been handling at my age, but they could depend on me to do it. And so they would give me a little room. And my brothers even say, one living brother that I have contact with now says, no, he doesn't understand how come dad and mama tolerated me, because I was pushy now. So some of the problems I had, probably I would have had some problems, I suspect, if I'd have been white. That's what Grif Stockley and I've got to talk about, because I suspect I would have had some problems if I'd have been white. It wasn't all because the white folks were terrible on black folks.
Now, the Morrow School District, you were attending school in the Morrow School District at that time, or
yes.
And it later became a sundown town, right?
Yes, the town of Morrow itself became a sundown, and they worked at that. They worked at it very quietly. There was one black man. When I just before I moved back home in 69, 70, there was one black man living in Morrow. They had managed to get all of them out, and they couldn't. He had a church there. And they, in either late 69 or early 70, they burned that church down and the little house he had attached to it. And then there were no blacks there, at least in 70, 71, 72, up until, I don't think there are any blacks living in Morrow now, but I don't go and ask. An interesting thing about Morrow, I got to tell you about Morrow. Morrow is worked for years. They started in 1962 trying to build a sewer system. And when I got started doing my work with water and sewer, Morrow came to us and said, will you help us? Well, hell, they were in the zone we were working in. And said, yes, I working with them, I think, in 73. And in 75, they started pumping sewage. Now, they'd been working on it since 62. We did it in 2 years. The mayor, and I'm trying to think of his name, because he really was but we wanted him to write a letter so that we had done a good job, so we could use it for purposes of convincing folks to give us more money. That's what you do with these little organizations. They wouldn't write a letter. They said they couldn't put their name on nothing that was associated with us. And the mayor would actually, on more than one occasion, he'd see me in town and start crying, because he was a decent guy. I'm trying to think of his name. I can't think of his name now. But he said, we did you wrong. I said, well, hell, we managed to survive it, which is the way I kind of dealt with those things, particularly with people who were no longer trying to squeeze me. I don't maintain a hate or a resistance when you stop trying to squeeze me. Now, while you squeeze me, I'm going to be pretty tight and prepared as I can be. But once we get an understanding, then you and I can be friends.
Well, you mentioned the Emmett Till story, but much earlier than that. In fact, I guess about 20 years before you were born, just down the road, a little bit to the east of you, you had the Elaine Race Massacre, where I guess is probably the worst racial violence in American history, probably after the Civil War anyway, where you had law enforcement, and this was a law enforcement deal. This was probably the original Black Lives Matter issue, I guess, when law enforcement in the form of the deputy sheriffs and deputized vigilantes and federal troops came in and slaughtered who knows how many, at least 200, perhaps as many as 800 Black people. And nothing like it in history compares to that, I think. But anyway, and then there was a code of silence. I think they held in the paper, put a thing in, a little notice from the business leadership. Everyone is to stop talking about what happened here. And they did. And nobody talked about that until Grif Stockley really began to write about it in about 2000. And we finally began to find out what really happened back there. But did you ever hear anything about the Elaine thing while you were growing up? It was about, what, 20 miles away?
About, let's see, 15 miles to Walnut, about 23 miles, 24 miles.
Elaine.
actually almost due south, though, it really was. But no, we did. It was not discussed. It was that what you hear say every now and then is something about the situation, the race ride at Elaine. But I didn't learn anything significant about it until I came back home in '70, and I got to be friends with the gentleman over there who was much more respectable than I was. He was a physician, Dr. Robert Miller. But Dr. Robert Miller and I were political allies in a lot of ways that probably would surprise some people, because Miller was really kind of aggressive in his trying to make certain that he was treated and black people were treated fairly. And he told me one time, we were drinking, and he told me one time about his uncles being killed. And that's when I first learned something about it. Of course, I didn't learn any real details. I got my details from Grif Stockley. Didn't get it from there was nothing in the history books, and it was not talked about. I remember that we talked about at school in 1954 when Brown versus Board of Education was handed down. But there was nothing I never heard a teacher or anybody say anything about it, except it seems to me that I heard some old men talking about it at church one time or something. But it was again the kind of conversation you'd hear just 2 or 3, maybe a half a sentence, and then they would disappear on you, just stop. They did a good job of silencing people.
Well, they did. And I think what happened was that they had, the white people, the business leadership of the community, they got their story out that day, which is their story was that this was an uprising that blacks were organizing with this union, and they were going to go out and kill all the white people, all the white landowners in the community, and take over their farms. That was the official story. As goofy as it sounded, that was the official story. It was adopted by the state newspapers, so when their official story was out, they obviously wanted everybody to shut up and quit talking about it. And of course, black people got the message: if you talk about it, we're going to get killed. I mean, there were plenty already messages from Emmett Till on that what the danger to blacks was. So it's really kind of an amazing thing that 50 years or more of silence on that whole thing until, as you say, your contemporary over there, Grif Stockley. By the way, y'all didn't know each other growing up. You were, I guess,
I'm 3 years older than Grif,
yeah.
and we did not know each other. I knew who his daddy was. His daddy owned a store, a furniture store, and my mama's first electric refrigerator came from that store. She bought it on time. That means she paid for it by the month. And she subsequently, I believe, got a stove from Owens and Stockley. That's what the name of the store was. That was Stockley product was Grif's daddy.
Well,
I understand from conversation. Grif and I talk to each other from time to time now. Because I understand from conversation, Grif, his daddy actually they come out of Mississippi where they own had substantial landholders, plantation, and came to Marianna and opened a store. And his daddy didn't actually spend much time at the store. Old man Owen he let him run the store, and somebody else he had there. And of course, I didn't know all that. All I knew was Mama had a refrigerator, and you could freeze ice in the refrigerator and make ice cream in those little trays. You just had to take it out and stir it. And I was accustomed to an ice cream freezer where you turn the crank on it. So it was special to have a refrigerator with that in the house that would keep food and make ice.
Well, Grif, I think, played football a little bit for the Marianna team. I don't think he was a star, but he played a little football. You didn't climb on the fence to watch him play, did you?
We did, but I didn't know who was who. Yeah. I did remember one old boy. I graduated from high school in '58, and they had one old boy playing for them in '50. He graduated in '57, and I remember he played tackle, and he had a real big head. Now the reason why I remember him is because we had a boy who was in my class, and he wanted to play football in the fall of '56, which had been his junior year in high school, and it is alleged the coach told us that Mr. Whitten told Mrs. Strong. Mr. Whitten was the superintendent. Told Mrs. Strong, said, "Well, we can't buy no helmet for that black boy because we got one over to future and he's graduating and he can play next year." So my friend Joseph Barnes couldn't play football in '56, '57. He played, 55 and '56. The fall of '56. He had to play in the fall of '57, which was his senior year, because he didn't have a helmet to fit his head. But they had a helmet over at the white school over at Future, that big head boy over there who graduated in '57. So anyway, it kept you conscious of all the time. your books had all the writings in them. They come from our books all came from over the Futrell, over to the White High School. You're always reminded. And of course, you sort of develop a kind of a skill at not letting it control all of your thinking. Because if I've been crazy much earlier. I don't say it didn't happen later, but you've been crazy much earlier if you spent all your time concentrating on how this was working for you. It really was always in your face.
Yeah. Well, speaking of books, all your books were hand-me-downs, right?
Yes, we got all our books from Futrell High School.
Yeah, when they were worn out, when the white kids wore them out, then you got them.
That's right. The white kids got new books and we took theirs.
Yeah, that's what happened all over Arkansas. That's happened
yes.
down home with us, and until I guess probably 1971, when Dale Bumpers passed the free textbook law. Well, anyway, I think I mentioned we were talking about football over there in Marianna. It was a big powerhouse in football. The white kids.
Porcupines.
Yeah,
Marianna Porcupines.
Porcupines. But I think I mentioned to you one time that I was at Boys State in 1954 at Camp Robinson. I had a roommate in one of those little old shacks out there, and his name was Charlie Flowers. And he was the fullback for Marianna, and I thought he was a big shot. He thought he was a real big shot at Boys State, and I didn't like him very much. But he later went on to Ole Miss and became All-American or something at Ole Miss.
That is correct. And we did used to sit on the fence and watch him play, because he drew attention. Charlie Flowers drew the attention, and we didn't go in the stadium. We'd actually sit on the fence on the north side of the stadium. And watch their games. And sometimes when we had a pretty good player, they would sit on the fence, white people would sit on the fence and watch our games.
Well, let's move on. You graduated from high school, and before you go to college, you go to Vietnam, right?
No, I went to college for a short time and dropped out of college. Yeah, I dropped out of college.
And came back. Yeah, okay.
Yes. I dropped out of college and had a couple of rather consequential experiences. I dropped out of college in January 1961. I've gone 2.5 years, and moved to Chicago. And then in June of '62, I got married, and on June the 17th, and on June the 25th of the same year, my wife died, and that was a kind of a real consequential situation. I kind of went a little berserk, but nonetheless, a year and a half later, I was drafted into the Army, and the Army had a unique impact on me, because first I didn't want to be there, and I didn't think I'd be drafted because I had asthma at that time and had flat feet. But what I didn't understand fully was that the Army was building up for Vietnam in 1964, and they would draft anybody who could walk. I mean, if you could walk, they drafted. They figured they'd treat whatever health problems you had.
They might have drafted Donald Trump.
Except they didn't. No, they didn't. They let Don manage to invest in that he shouldn't be drafted. But in any case, one of a guy I knew had broken his leg when he was a young kid, and one of his legs was 3 inches shorter than the other one. And they drafted him, even though he didn't stay in but 180 days. But they drafted him. So anyway, I got drafted, and my experience in the Army, I thought this experience was really rather important for me, because I learned what I consider to be a life lesson, a lesson that still applies to me. I was very resistant the first 3 weeks of basic training, very resistant, arguing with captains and making them, they crossed me, I straightened them up. And the sergeant, my platoon sergeant, his name was Shaviro, called me in one evening after I'd been arguing with the captain. And he said to me, "Neal, I've studied your profile, and I know that the profile, that's what they call the record they had of you." He said, "I know that you have some ability and you could do some things. So now the Army is bigger than you are, and we're going to have to, and I can't let you ruin my training cycle. We're going to crush you if you don't straighten up. Now, if you straighten up and soldier for me, I'll look out for you." And that was one night I did not sleep at all, because I had to think about that. I was 23 years old, 22, almost 23, coming up on my 23rd birthday. required a lot of thought. Every thought I had kept saying to me, you can't beat the Army. It's a little bigger than you. So you got to find another way to deal with this. And the next morning, that's what I had decided. And I did soldier. And I soldiered so well for the next 5.5 weeks of basic training that at the end of the training cycle, there were 1,400 trainees in that training cycle at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I was a soldier disciple. And my hometown gave me another little lesson then in how they operated. The colonel who was in charge of that training company gave a copy of the letter citing me as a soldier disciple, best of 1,400, gave me a copy, sent a copy to my daddy, and sent a copy to the Courier Index. And I reminded my daddy it's going to be in the Courier Index. The Courier Index sold my dad a paper for 6 months. He watching for that story, never appeared.
Was this in, what year was this, 62 or 63?
64. This is 64.
64. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think to say if it was 62, I was down there too. I was at Fort Polk in 1962.
Yeah, well, I went out in 64, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so you get out, so you learned a lesson in Army, and you get out and you go back to college.
Yes.
At Le Moyne, right?
When I first got out, I went up to Lane. I got put out up there too.
Well,
I
tell me
went to Lane in Jackson, Tennessee when I first, well, not when I first got out. When I first got out, I came back to Chicago and fiddled around, and my brother convinced me to go to Lane. So I went out to Lane, got close to graduation within a semester of graduation. I was scheduled to graduate in May, and I got put out in March. So, but in any case, I went to Lane and got crossways with the administration there and got put out. Came back to Memphis then, went to work for a little project called Memphis Area Project South. We call it MAP South. MAP South had an agreement with St. Jude Hospital. MAP South would provide the manpower and the resources to provide enriched foods for pregnant and lactating mothers. And St. Jude would provide the healthcare people. They used, that was my first experience with nurse practitioners. And so I worked with 3 nurse practitioners from over at St. Jude and about 5 staff, and we delivered enriched foods, milk and other foodstuffs for some 2,200 families in the South Memphis area. And that's where I was when I met Jan Reed and Corinne Cass. This is in 69. And sometimes I believe it was in late October, early November of 69. And they told me what they were doing in Marianna. And of course, Marianna is my hometown, so I took great interest in this. So I stopped what I was doing and to listen to them. And we finally, they understood. I told them I was from Marianna. And then I asked my daddy about them. And I thought that was always interesting. I could not get my daddy to call them Vista. He called them vision workers. And I don't think he ever referred to them as vistas, but as vision workers.
Oh, that's a good name.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought it fit. I finally gave up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before that, and you're talking about college, you were something of a troublemaker, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. I mean,
pretended demonstrations and protests and so forth there in Memphis.
Yeah, it was what we call a good trouble. We were involved, and we started the sit-ins in Memphis on March 19, 1960 was our first sit-in. And what we did is we went to the public library, the museum, and the zoo. It was interesting. Memphis had an arrangement where the zoo, Black folks could go to the zoo on Thursdays, and Thursdays the zoo was closed to white people because that was the day they cleaned up after the animals. So you'd be stepping around, they'd be cleaning up behind the animals. And so we justified, our president was a reasonably conservative, because he had to be reasonably conservative to keep a Black school funded in a time when Black folk wasn't paying any money to the school. And I certainly wasn't making any great contributions as a student. So he resisted, and we finally told him what we found worn out over him when we said we were just going to the public facilities I remember me and a fellow named Hardin Jones, who subsequently got a doctorate in biology, were taking taking biology courses, and we were doing research, and if you had some series of books or articles you wanted to read, or you had to go to your staff person. Your staff person would talk to somebody in the white community, and then the white person would go to the library, get the books for you. It was a process that just never worked at all. You could never, Dr. Gibson, our biology teacher, didn't give us that kind of room to just take all that kind of time. So it just didn't work. And so Dr. Price, the president of my college, had a hard time answering me and Hardin Jones that Saturday when he was arguing against us going down there. And I know he did not hold it against me, because when I decided to drop out of school, he said to me, if I would stay, he would find a way to make certain all my bills were paid, my tuition and books and room and board were paid. So he really wanted me. He really was impressed, I think, with us, even though officially he had to take position that we could not be trying to integrate facilities in Memphis, because those were the same people, those white people, were the same people who were giving him money to support Lamont. And so it was a real wrestle. I don't know how folks supposed to survive that. He had to one day try to convince folk to provide some donations to Lamont. On the next day, he got to challenge them on their practices and habits or student work. And so these things really sort of guided my thinking and helped shape me as I continued to go through this process.
All right, so you took the job to go over to
Yes.
go back to Marianna.
Yes.
And as the director of this clinic. Now tell me a little bit about, this is a Vista, Jan Reed and another friend of hers that together set this thing up.
That's correct. Her name was Corrine Cass, Corrine, Cass, C-A-S-S. Corrine was a LPN, a licensed practical nurse. Jan was had been an English teacher, but they both joined a new program in Vista called the Vista Health Advocates. And they were assigned to East Arkansas. And I do not have this in any document, but all of the reports I get is that they went to Arkansas because Winthrop Rockefeller, who was the governor up until January of 1971, Winthrop Rockefeller invited Vista to Arkansas, and invited them to come to the Delta. And the stories I'm told is that Rockefeller, who actually was very helpful to me, but Rockefeller was sort of thumbing his nose at some of the Democrat white people over there who resisted him in every way. Resisted Rockefeller, I'm talking about. So, but in any case, they designed this program. First, they tried to put together something that was going to cover 4 or 5 counties, and they were discouraged from trying to pursue that because it was just too big a task to take on with the limited training and experience they had. And they finally designed this thing for 1 county. I think the first year that we had a total of the first 6 months of operation, we had a total of $39,000 some to operate on for 6 months. But Jan and Corrine put the project together. Dan Blumenthal joined them as they were putting on the final touches. He joined them in July of '69. Jan was kind of the administrative person. So when I began working, she started sharing with me everything she was doing and writing. All the letters from that point that went out officially from the clinic went out from me, but Jan Reed wrote them. Truth of the matter is, I didn't write the letters, she wrote them, and I would sign them. And then Jan left on June 30th of 1970. Jan left, her 2 years at Vista was up. And so from that point on, it was my show. I had to figure out how to make it happen.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Winthrop Rockefeller's role in that, and although you're saying you're not sure about that, and I never heard that at the time. I never knew exactly how it took place, but I assume what you say is correct, because that's what Winthrop Rockefeller would have done. And at the time, we were not aware of that, and he probably didn't want people to be aware of it probably as well, that was his role. But that's the kind of thing that Winthrop Rockefeller would have done. He was very interested in the healthcare. I mean, his whole family was going way back to the second generation, interested in healthcare, and particularly in the South, which was in terrible shape. So I think that makes sense, but that he was involved in that, and also I had not realized until I read your book that you had some medical expertise. I guess you had, well, not only you were a chemistry graduate, that was your major, I think, in college, chemistry, and that you had some experience in medical care and issues over there in Memphis at the time. So,
Yeah, I worked with them. Now, I don't want to claim that I knew anything.
no, I know that. Yeah,
But I did work with, I had
yeah.
a very close relationship with Dr. Don Pinkel, who was the founding medical director for St. Jude. Had a chance to meet Danny Thomas, the fundraisers. Don Pinkel agreed to serve on the board of Lee County Cooperative Clinic. We were great friends. He has a daughter in California that I talk to every year or two now, named Mary Pinkel. Because Don Pinkel had a bunch of children. He had 12, he was a Catholic. He did not believe in birth control. He had 12 or 13 children. But Dr. Pinkel was considered to be a real expert in child cancer, an early child development. And so he ran St. Jude for a number of years and left sometimes in mid-70s, I believe.
Well, so you went to work at the clinic in 1970, sometime, what, the summer or fall?
No, I went to work on March the 1st was my first official day.
All right. And so then I guess 1970. So I guess it was toward the end of the year, or maybe right after Dale Bumpers. Dale Bumpers beats Rockefeller in the general election of 1970. Beats him in a landslide, almost 2-1.
Yeah, that was no. It was worse than that. It was the reason why I know because I was actually involved in that effort. I'm trying to think of the lady's name. It was a white lady over here in Little Rock who was really a great woman, and later on became very helpful to us in a lot of political ways.
Wasn't Mary McLeod, was it?
No, God, I can't think of her name. But in any case, we had met her through somebody. I don't know how we met her. Sterling King and I, and she told us after Dale beat Faubus in the runoff, she told us that Dale was going to win the governorship. Well, I remember this was our first big foray into politics, and we didn't understand nothing about looking at what's going on in other communities. All we knew was what was going on in Lee County and Phillips County. And so we vigorously defended that. No, Rockefeller's going to be reelected. When the race ended, Rockefeller won 2 counties. He won Lee County and he won Phillips County. Didn't win another county.
That's right.
Dale Bumpers swept the 73 counties. Rockefeller got 2.
That's right.
Irene Samuel, you know the name, Irene Samuel.
Well, yeah. She wound up with, she originally was with Rockefeller for a while, but then she was very close and she became a part of the Dale Bumpers administration.
Yes.
I'll tell you a little story about Irene in a minute.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Dale gets elected, and almost immediately there's a big crisis over there.
Yes.
They're asking, I think, for a federal grant or something, and the governor has to approve it.
Yes.
And all hell breaks loose over there. And that's when we first began to hear about it in Little Rock. I don't think we'd even I guess we'd read something about the Lee County Cooperative Clinic, but it really wasn't an issue. It was a very small story over there until all the trouble began. And so I was at the state capitol for the Gazette and in the governor's office every day, and I knew he was under intense pressure and about whether to prove that grant or not. So we wrote about it a lot. They was obviously under a great deal of pressure. So one day, and we were wondering, what's he going to do? Because typically Dale Bumpers never would announce his decision on anything. When the legislature was in session and they'd be passing all these terrible bills, and they wanted to know, legislators come to Dale, are you going to veto that bill? I need to vote for it, but I don't want that thing to come along. Are you going to veto it? And Dale wouldn't say. He said, well, you have to make your own decisions about that. I might sign that. So, but that was all of his strategy, all of his life, is he wouldn't say until he finally made a decision. So I asked Irene, what's Bumpers going to do about Olly Neal and that clinic over there? And she said, I don't know what he's going to do. I said, well, have you talked to him about it? Yes, she said, I talked to him yesterday, and I said, Dale, what are you going to do about that clinic over there? And Dale said, Irene, why did you go to work for me? And she said, what do you mean? And he said, did you go to work for me because you thought I'd do the right thing? And she said, well, yes. And he just turned around and walked off.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I said, what do you think that means? He said, well, I assume he means he'll approve it, but I don't know. That's all he'd said. So I'm going to read you, I think here, I did in 1999, right after Dale Bumpers left left the Senate. He retired
Yes.
from the Senate in 1998 and went to and retired. And so I did an oral history with him for 11 hours. We talked about his whole life. And so, and I looked up this afternoon and our comments. We got to that point in about the 5th or 6th hour of our interview. And I said, one of the first crises and tests of your leadership, I guess, was the dispute over the Lee County Cooperative Clinic. Dale, I know it well. Well, tell us about that fight. That was the first year I was governor, I believe, early on. It was a clinic in Lee County in Marianna, and they were asking for, I believe, $1 million grant, you know, from the Office of Economic Opportunity in Washington. I'm not sure what it was, but some federal office granted money for medical facilities. This facility in Lee County served almost exclusively the Black community of Marianna, which was over 50% of the county. Lee County, I knew nothing about the clinic. I did know from making 2 or 3 stops in Marianna during the campaign that it was very controversial. I will never forget making a speech on top of the platform. It was a sort of in the town square. That's the Robert E. Lee statue, I guess. I can't remember exactly the scene, but I do know one thing is that the whites were all sitting here and the blacks were all sitting over there. I knew that town was in a state of upheaval over that clinic and the whites didn't want it. You know, just call the spade a bloody shovel. They didn't want that clinic there, even though it was serving a constituency that had nothing before that clinic, virtually nothing. Lee County was one of the 2 counties that I didn't carry when I ran for governor because it was heavily Black. And Rockefeller got virtually every Black vote in Lee County. But in any event, to shorten the story, after I was elected, it fell my lot to sign off on this grant application. The federal agency, the name of which I forget, would not grant this $1 million plus to that clinic for the ensuing year without the governor's approval. I was descended on by folks and the leaders, political officials, everybody in Lee County not to do it. They said it's just a mishmash of Black activity. It's a group of people who are not nearly as concerned about health care as they are about getting their hands on that money. They made all of these different arguments. Lee County was on the point of exploding. It became such a hostile and volatile issue that I was scared that somebody was going to get killed down there because there were night riders. On one occasion, a couple of shots were fired into somebody's house. It was getting out of control. So I picked 3 or 4 people that I had a lot of confidence in to go down there and spend a couple of days and assess that thing. They came back and said, quote, you know, they need this facility. There isn't any question, but they need this facility. All of them said, we can't overstate the volatility of the situation down there. Somebody's going to get hurt. White shops were being boycotted by the Blacks and so on. But to make a long story short, a couple of white leaders in Lee County came to me very privately and very secretly and told me that they would sign that grant, that the Black people down there needed that facility and that they thought they could cope with the rest of it. And I said, Lon Man? Yes, he was. Lon Man was one of them. So I signed off on it and things began to erupt. I sent 9 state troopers down there and I left them there for 2 or 3 days. It was really, really a very, very difficult situation. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had another situation down in Pine Bluff and I believe it was Dollar Way School, similar to that because, you know, segregation was just coming to an end. It hadn't come to an end and an awfully lot of people in this state had not given up on segregation. There were a lot of them. I don't want to say right wingers. It was just a custom in the state. They couldn't accept it. They could not. They would not accept it and they were willing to perpetrate violence if they thought that would keep integration from occurring. But I sent these state troopers down to Marianna And I went on statewide television. I made a short 5-minute speech about why I did that and why they needed it and why I had sent the state police down there. I said, there is no place for violence, and particularly over something like this. Then things began to get quieter. That the short of it is that that is virtually only the only health facility in Lee County today. It has a remarkable track record, and everybody down there takes great pride in it. And this was Dale Bumpers in 1999.
I have to tell you that Dale Bumpers is in an extremely difficult situation. As a politician myself, I mean, I run for office, as you talk about, lost some, won a few. He had, I thought, a very difficult line to walk, but he kind of showed me where he was. I'll tell you about an incident that I don't know if it appears in the book or not. We were still talking about that $1.2 million grant, which is going to be used to construct $600,000 to construct a facility and $600,000 to run the facility for 18 months. The director of the agency, the OEO agency, Dr. Leon Cooper, who was a pediatrician himself, by the way, called me and asked me, could I visit with him? He had to figure out something to do about this thing. And so we agreed to meet in Atlanta with a former Arkansas man named Sonny Walker. And you remember Sonny Walker.
Sonny, yeah.
We went to Sonny's house, and this was a very informal, kind of relaxed situation. So we had drinks and talked about what the situation was. Leon was a wonderful guy trying to help us figure out how to walk through this thing. The alcohol made us all a little relaxed. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we got to talking about what Bumpers was going to do. And Leon says, how do you know? And so I said, because I've gotten the hints, I've gotten an indication. He said, well, has he said it to you? I said, I'll call him. That's what the whiskey told me to say. I called Dale Bumpers at the mansion, or was he in Charleston that night? It may have been a Friday night, he was in Charleston. I called him wherever it was, because I had all three of his numbers, and that was part of what gave me some confidence. And I will tell you, it was a part of what helped us sort of keep some calm, because Bumpers was really better than anything I could have expected. I had all three of his numbers. I had the number at the office, the number at the mansion, and the number in Charleston. We talked on the phone for more than an hour. He got two of his aides on the phone. I don't remember who they were.
Tom McRae, probably.
I think it was, yeah. But
Maybe
at 1 o'clock in the morning, we actually called the governor. Yeah, well, on the governor. I was the boogeyman, and he took the call. So he gave us a lot of. Now Leon Cooper also told me something, which I think I put in the book. Dr. Cooper said that we had to get Bumpers to sign off. But if we did all we were supposed to do and didn't do anything stupid, and for some reason Bumpers didn't sign off, he thought he had the wherewithal to override the state's veto. So, I mean, I had to do all this stuff, right? Because I had all these people who were telling me enough stuff. See, I couldn't discuss that with anybody, I couldn't tell anybody that Cooper said he'd override. I couldn't tell anybody that Bumper said it talk to me at 1 o'clock in the morning. Because they would say, everybody would get upset. Why is he talking to this boy at that time in the morning? So anyway, it was a lot of pressure on me to
well, did he pretty much give you the message that he was going to approve it?
He made clear to me that he did not intend to veto it. Now, what I had come to think was he was going to let it pass without signature, and that would have been presumed to be they would have gone when they had made the grant if he had not signed it at all. Just let the time. They had a deadline, I think 30 days or something. He had to sign this thing, and if he didn't sign it at all, that was going to give some instruction to the feds. They could say, well, we can go on. The governor doesn't object. He didn't say it. And that's what I thought he was going to do. And then on the last day, he announced he was signing. So it was really, you're talking about some hard pumping. I mean, I got a pacemaker now. I don't know if the pacemaker would handle it back in those days. Oh, those were some tight times.
Yes. I wonder whether we could, Heather, if you could put up the cartoon that Marvin Schwartz. Yeah, there we are. All right, Marvin Schwartz, who probably ought to be doing this conversation with you rather than me, he found this this cartoon from that period, and this is a cartoon by Ron Meyer, who I think was a cartoonist for the Benton Courier. Might have been the editor down at the Benton Courier as well for some years. And anyway, so Marvin sends this this evening, and he wanted to pass this question on to you. How accurate is the message of the cartoon, which was published in the state newspapers in 1970 or 71, I think. And I think this was republished in the Arkansas Gazette. So how accurate is that message? I'm going to choke to the life out of you. And this is two guys joined at the waist, a black and a white guy. And then he asked, how does a standoff like this develop and how is it resolved? And what is the this lesson here for contemporary social conflict? So how accurate is that message?
Well, I think it's absolutely accurate. There's no question about it. Marvin, by the way, I should tell you, I know Marvin quite well, and he's always been thoughtful. I mean, he asks the right questions to understand at least the issue. The Marvin is that cartoon is exactly right. That's what we had, is a situation where Black folks were sufficiently united, and that they were not willing to say things can go on as they're going. They were not willing to say we're going to do much better next year. Black folks wanted some action, some indication of things would be better now, today, now. And white folks were caught so off guard. White folks had spent 300 and some years with the, as we say it now in the Black Lives Matter era, with their knees on Black folks' necks. And they were just unwilling to just sort of jump up and let Black folks stand up and talk to them face to face. And so Marvin's question about whether, I think how he put it here, let me see if I can find the question right quick here, how he put it. He said, how accurate is the message? I think the message, it's very accurate. How does a standoff like this develop and how is it resolved? Let's talk about how it developed. It developed because for all those years, from whenever time Lee County was started, white folks had operated in such a way that Black folk had no rights that they were bound to respect in no form or fashion. And that was just made a part of everything that existed there. That's how it got there. By the time this particular situation came, some of us had had some different kinds of exposure and just were not convinced it had to stay that way. I certainly felt that way very strongly. There were many people with me. There were 4 or 5 of us who had been to the army and been to Vietnam, and we understood that there was no such thing as living a life of fear. We were not afraid of dying. So if somebody said, well, you could have gotten killed, that is true, but we were not jumping to get killed. That is, you didn't see us take on, when Bumpus had the state troopers there, we didn't take on the state troopers. When Bumpus had the troopers there, they were gathered with all the whites on the west side of the city park, and we were on the east side of it. We left and went back to the church because we couldn't win that fight. They had all of them had guns, we didn't. But we were not willing to let them play dead. Now, how's it resolved? Somebody's got to show some sign that something's going to change. We were not willing, and this probably sounds bad coming from me, an old man and a retired judge. But I say, even today, we were not willing to say, y'all just promise us y'all going to do better, and we'll take that. Now, I must say to you, Ernie, that an important factor was when Bumpus approved the grant for the clinic. We knew, all of us understood, that the clinic was very temporary until it built a $600,000 building. $600,000, not much money now, but back in 1972, that was a pretty good chunk of change. Right. And so that made it permanent. So that gave us, we knew we were getting something. So it made the negotiations, as that came through, it made the negotiations, because you remember this boycott was going on while Bumpus was wrestling with this grant thing. The boycott lasted from June of 1971 to August of 1972. And Bumpus was wrestling with this grant application in the spring of 72. He finally signed off on it, if I remember correctly, the last day of March the 30th, I believe, in 19 72. So I don't know whether that was any part of his intent, but it certainly made negotiations began to have at least some reason. Now, the problem was that we were all so set. That is, we were not willing to say, we're gonna do better later on, just be patient. And they were not willing to give in to Black folks because that would spoil us and make us think we could come and demand stuff later. And so it was a situation where it was a real standoff, a real standoff. Now, how do you solve it? Well, I think that two things probably would have helped some. One, the most important thing would have been for some white folk in leadership roles, and I don't know, maybe Lon was one of those people. Lon and I did not get along. I did not like Lon, thought he was my greatest troublemaker, greatest enemy. So Lon and I did not get along. I don't want to lead you to believe that we worked well together. We didn't.
That cartoon might have been Lon in that cartoon, wasn't it?
They said the newspaper showed, I think what they were doing, it was showing me and Lon. That was the Memphis paper. You remember Memphis had two papers, the Commercial Appeal and the Memphis Press-Cemetery. Yeah. Commercial Appeal put out a paper that had 2 pages about the Marianna situation. Had me on one side and had Lon on the other side, standing, that was in our interviews in columns following our pictures. And so I think that's what, I don't remember exactly, but I think that's what that was. That was supposed to be me and Lon. But I think what part of it would have helped a little bit is for somebody to just have done a little bit. I wrote this book in part, Ernie, because I think that many of my white friends who do not understand how come I can say what I'm saying now, say that I don't regret having squeezed Marianna economically. It's my hometown. I want to save it. And I do things. I'm working on a project right now and trying to put some additional money there for a project, because I'm always trying to do something with Marianna. It's my home. But I am not willing for it to be a home that treats me like a lesser citizen. It has to treat me just like it treats its white citizens, equal as well. And somebody should have read that the mistake you made is you let these Black folk go out someplace and read and see some other things, and they're not going to accept this anymore. And when we put our lives on the line in Vietnam, I wasn't no great war hero, but I certainly was in a situation where one of my friends got injured to the point where he died subsequently from the injuries. We were attacked. So there was nonsense, and there was an old boy with us named Melvin Campbell who had more experience than I had running around in those rice paddies. So we were not willing, we were not afraid of dying, and they should have understood some of that, and they would have come with a different story. What they came to us with and stood by very firmly is, you call off this boycott and we'll talk to you. No, sir. Not today, not this week, not this time. And so my book is not the story of all Black people, but it's the story of one Black person who I have tried to express the experiences I had that made me what I am. I do not say that white folks are responsible for all my shortcomings. I mean, I was kind of a troublemaker from the front. But I do say that the experiences I had make me have the attitudes I had. When I came on the Court of, I know this is a subject, when I came on the Court of Appeals, the judges and staff up there had never enough to meet to talk about the fact that I was hiring Black clerks. I wish Judge Rowe was still alive, because she's the one, she was on the Supreme Court at the time, and she put a stop to all of it. That was a statute in Arkansas that said the courts had to report each year, the administrative officer of the court had to report to the Supreme Court justices the percentage of the racial composition of the employees. And of course, the Court of Appeals at that time had 6 judges and 12 clerks and 6 administrative assistants. That's 18 people who were non-lawyers. Non-judges. There was not one Black person among any of them. So when I came on the court, I hired 2 Black clerks and a Black administrative assistant. Wendell Griffin hired a white clerk, a white administrative assistant, and a Black clerk. So we just gave them a better report to take to the legislature, and that's what Rose told them in her quiet way. And I know you remember Judge Rose. She was. Yes. The point is simply is that somebody needs to try to figure out, if we, even today in this era of the reckoning, the racial reckoning, I guess some people call it. I think my friends need to see what experiences are these people operating from? Why is it that they're unwilling to say, I will wait until tomorrow to see if you can do better? Why is it that it's not all right we've got a school system here in Little Rock. They built 2 brand new, beautiful schools. They spent $50 million more on one than do on another one. On the gym or something. I don't know all the details because I'm not into that. And I'm, disabled and retired, staying at home now. But I read the newspaper. And Price Marshall says that they have that difference. Why would somebody think they can get away with that now? We can read, black folks can read, they can analyze, some of them got PhDs, some of them can think. So we see this stuff and we're gonna raise hell about it until it gets right. Now, the most important thing we can do, it seems to me, is start to understand what our peers' experiences have been. I understand when I was serving as a trial judge, I worked with 4 other judges, all white. And I made it my business to understand something about what their experiences were because I knew that some of the things I wanted to do required agreement among the judges. So therefore, I need to be able to talk with some understanding to Harvey Yates. I need to be able to talk in the later years with some understanding to Richard Proctor. And I think Proctor will tell you, Olly's a reasonable person because I understood. And when I started with something, I started from where he was to try to move to where I wanted to be. Not starting saying you a stupid low down son of a bitch, which I thought he was, but that's not where you start. And they can't start with me by saying he's a dumb black, whatever else they want to call me. They got to start and say, well, he's got a law degree just like me, so maybe he know much as I do. Anyway, I get on my soapbox when I start talking about it. But Schwartz is right. Will it change? I don't know. I don't know where we are. We have gotten to a situation now where this country, in my opinion, is more divided, more polarized than since the 60s, in my opinion. I don't know. I don't think, at least in my 79 years, I have not seen us where, I follow some of my old friends on Facebook, retired judges, other people, and the polarization, the way we feel about each other is just outrageous. And if we don't find some way to at least understand where each other coming from, we won't be able to figure out how to bridge that gap. So Marvin, what we need to do, it seems to me, is the folk in charge, that's generally white folks, have got to learn to understand, or got to study and understand what the black folks' experiences have been so that they can figure out how to respond. I say that because I think I've had to do that because I've had a chance to take leadership roles as a black man in the white folks' world, so to speak. As prosecuting attorney, I had to figure out how to treat white folks in the same way I treated black folks. As a judge, I had to do the same thing. And I think I did that pretty well. I think it was interesting that in 2010, when we had a vacancy over in the first district, that the lawyers over there the white lawyers asked Mike Beebe to appoint me. I didn't want the job because I was glad to be retired. Was willing to take it because I always like to try to do some good, but it was not a job I sought. So Marvin, learn something about the black experience. You can start off by reading Outspoken, but there are many other books out there by people who are much more representative of the black experience than I am, I suspect. But that's one representation. Outspoken is one representation.
Judge, let's get to a few questions here. This is from George Proctor, whom you know, who was a U.S. attorney over in the Eastern District of Arkansas for some years. And he asked, would you advise blacks to attend historically black colleges, as you did, or to go to predominantly white colleges, as did your son, daughter, and the young woman you mentored? And then the second question, in the event of the implementation of a public option for healthcare, Medicare for all, universal health, what role would your Lee County Cooperative Clinic play? Well, let's get the first question first.
First question, I strongly recommend for folk whose level of confidence has not already, whose full self-confidence has not already solidified when they get out of high school, and that's most kids, most black kids, that they go to a black school because they're going to be supported, mentored, given, nurtured much more than they would get at a white school. If they've had the experiences, my daughter, who went to Swarthmore, that was not necessarily my recommendation that she wanted to do. And I believe she was fully ready to handle it. because she had been exposed to enough to know what the realities were. My daughter, my adopted daughter, semi-adopted, whatever you call it, Anisha, went to Columbia. She got a full ride there, which she needed. She had been in my house for 4 or 5 years. She understood what the world was like out there and how she had to respond to it. Understood first that because something's wrong all the time, you can't necessarily change it. In the Army, I couldn't make them do no different. I had to figure out how to work with them. That's what she understood. My adopted son, Nairi Billups, went to a little school called Knox College. Billups thought his all through. He'd been around me since the time he was about 10. We worked together. Billups decided he wanted to go to a school where he could figure out how white folks were doing and making money. He did not want to go where he could learn to be a Black activist. He wanted to learn how the white folks run their businesses, make money, and who they were. And so he went to Knox College. He had a full ride. And he's doing quite well. I mean, he makes more money than I've ever made. He's involved in medical trials and medical that sort of stuff in the medical field. So I think it depends on who the child is, and what the child's level of self-confidence is.
Sure.
A child who has little self-confidence probably needs to go to a Black school for the nurturing. A child who is strong and figured out how he can, where he's trying to go and how he's going to get there, come hell or high water, go to the white school where they've got probably more resources and there are going to be more people out there that's got plenty of money.
Another question, what are your thoughts regarding the current movement? And what advice would you give the Black Lives Matter to assist in bringing about change today? You discussed that a little bit. If you want to.
Yeah, that's a difficult question for me, because I have to tell you that I am not convinced that we did all that we should have done in my era of trying to change the world. And so I don't know that I've got the answer, but I do believe that what young people are doing now, they have got to figure out how to stay focused and not get caught out in situations. Remember that there is something called propaganda, and when you leave certain things open for them, for the other folk, they will destroy your effort through propagandizing. An example of what I'm talking about. I think you have to be careful. When we were doing the sit-ins in Memphis, we adopted a strategy that said that none of us would be involved in any violent type activity. And we lived that in 1960. Now in Marianna was a different time. It was a different situation. That was not a situation where we had folks who were not only in charge of us, but outnumbered us by large numbers. We were many Black folks in Lee County was white folks. So we were much more demanding. I don't think that Black Lives Matter, though, has got those numbers where it can be can stand up in the same way. I just think we have to be careful how to figure out how to use the television. I do remember when we were in Marianna, we were very careful to try to make certain that the information got to the newspaper. For example, during the boycott, we wanted to make certain people like you, Ernie, knew about the young white lawyer Al Daniels getting beat up, or the young newspaper man getting beat up over there. We wanted you to know about that because we knew you could relate to newspaper people. We were not lost. That was not lost on us. Now we were prepared to protect them, but both the newspaper man, I'm trying to think of his name, he's down in Atlanta now, that got beat up over there. I think he's writing for the Democrats at the time.
Oh yeah, Bill Houston.
Bill Houston, you know what I'm talking about. Bill Houston and Al Daniels was a young lawyer. In both those cases, I offered to send somebody to walk with them because the white boy wasn't going to mess with my people because we were as big as they were in Marianna. Now, not in Little Rock. You do that in Little Rock because they've got tanks down in the department, I suspect. But whatever they had, they had to deal with it, and we certainly weren't afraid of dying. But Bill Houston getting beat up, Al Daniels getting beat up, helped our case. Because even you newspaper people said, that is a shame. This boy is just trying to get a story. And that was to our benefit.
Yeah, I think this might be a good point to tell a story about that. I think that involves the county judge. What was that guy's name?
Haskell Adams.
Haskell Adams. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the county judge, and this was during the boycott, I guess the economic boycott, or was it the school boycott? I forgot which.
Economic, yeah.
Economic boycott, and it was your brother, I guess.
That's right, Prentice, my brother Prentice, and Raymond Cheeks.
Prentice, your brother. Tell us about that event, and then the trial as well.
The boycott was probably made effective primarily by Prentice Neal and Raymond Cheeks, not by Olly Neal. I get the credit, and I don't mind too much. But Prentice and Raymond Cheeks made the boycott effective. They were on the streets every day, come rain or shine, didn't matter, they were there. And Haskell Adams was the county judge, and he had been driving by looking at him, mean mugging him, as we call it mean mugging him. And finally one day he just tried to run over him and jump the sidewalk, try to hit him. And of course they went to the police station to file charges. Jim Cawley, who was the chief of police, said he couldn't do nothing about it. It was a county judge, he had to go to the county. Went to the sheriff, Courtney Lang said he couldn't do nothing about it. So they ended up going to Dean Ralph. They said they couldn't take no complaint. Went to Dean Ralph. Dean Ralph decided he'd be cool, so he took a complaint, and that's what led to the trial. And of course, Houston was over there to cover the trial. I believe Al Daniel was over there representing Prentice or representing Rayborn or representing somebody. This was just made white people really angry that the county judge was charged with battery with an automobile against the term they used, against a nigger. It didn't make no sense in Marianna. They couldn't stand it.
It never happened.
Oh, so they were. Now, the one thing I credit some people that I did on with the call. I credit Courtney Langston with encouraging them folks to do, because there would have been a lot of death over there if Courtney, as the sheriff, had encouraged them people to do some of the things they wanted to do. Courtney did not. And I have people who slipped and told me what Courtney was saying over there. Said, don't start nothing with them folks. Don't. I remember one night during the boycott and the curfew, some white boys drove by my house. I was living in my daddy's house on Moulton Street. We had, I believe it was, we have 8 people at the house all the time, because 2 people had to be up 24/7 at the house all the time watching. And these white boys drove by. They called me. I went and looked and copied down. They were in a station wagon. I copied down the license plate, and I called Courtney Langston, who was the sheriff at the time. And I said, Sheriff, this is Olly Neal. What you want, Olly? I said, you got some white boys just drove by here driving the station wagon. Here's the license plate number. If they drive by again, I'm not going to need to call you. I'm going to call Hodge. Hodge owned the funeral home, the white funeral home in Marianna. And so my report from that was that Courtney told his deputies, you find them boys and come take their asses back over there again. They're going to have to deal with me. And so there were a lot of people who did some things that I didn't know about. Of course, they were my absolute enemies, including Lon. And what you read to me about Lon, I'd heard that from somebody else earlier, that Lon actually told the governor that he probably ought to sign off on it. But that was before Lon, that was since Lon died when I first learned about that. So Lon and I never did get to be friends because he was my enemy.
Well, Lon probably liked the idea of the clinic was fine. The clinic was, my guess is the clinic was never really the issue. Yeah, it was you and the hell raising and stirring up people and making people unhappy with their situation. That's what it was all about. That was Lon's. He was against that. Clinic was all right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, continue with the story about what happened. Now the Judge Adams argued, I guess, that he just kind of lost control of his car.
He lost his brakes failed him. But the fact of the matter is that was all in preliminary. At the trial, he entered a plea of guilty to a negotiated plea of some reduced charge of reckless driving or something, accident, driving, some kind of minor driving infraction, and got a $100 fine. But now, for me as a lawyer, I wasn't a lawyer then, that ain't nothing. But for us then to get the county judge convicted was a major, major victory. Now that was a day when a lot of things could have happened real bad. I remember that the crowds were gathered, the white crowd on the west side of the park and the black crowd on the east side of the park. And I remember it was pretty clear some things getting ready to happen. The guy who owned the Western Auto store on the square there, just off the square, was passing out baseball, not baseball, but axe handles and other handles, sticks for folks to use. And we thought he passed out guns too, but we couldn't prove that. But we saw him passing out axe handles. And so I remember that very quickly we moved our people from downtown to the church on Liberty Street, because that was not because we were greatly fearful, but there was no win in that situation. Perhaps, if you think about it as cold as I was thinking about it then, perhaps you could take out one of them, but they're going to take out a bunch of you, and that wasn't going to measure up into anything. So we went home. We went to the church, and we agreed that what we would do is we could figure out how to make the squeeze a little tighter. That is, would nobody couldn't even buy your prescriptions down in the drugstore. And that's the way we dealt with that. It's just, we figured that as long as it was a standoff in terms of the physical activity, that was in our interest. Because if it became anything else, they certainly had access to greater weapons than we did. And that would be a real loss.
Okay, so, and I think that's when Bill Houston, after that trial and some scuffling outside and some people, and you described that incident where they
it took Bill Houston's camera and kind of slapped him around a little bit, knocked him around a little bit. And I don't remember exactly how that got worked out, but Houston's got his camera back, and he was escorted, if I remember correctly. And from that point on, for a little while, when the newspaper people came to town, they would call somebody and they would be escorted around Marianna. And I don't know how long they did that, but it was somebody was using some reasonable sense, is what I'm saying. I mean, I don't want to just say all the white people were terrible and crazy and we were all perfect and angelic. Somebody was using some intelligence, because, once things start going down a path, if you've got both sides that's lacking in fear, you don't know where it's going. And that's what we had there in 1971, 72. Al Daniels somebody drove him. I believe one of the deputy sheriffs drove him out of town. Al Daniels was a young lawyer working with the Walker Kaplan and Mays law firm. Jack Levy was that law firm at that time too, in 71. Yeah. So two people got beat up. Al Daniels and who was a young white lawyer, and Bill Houston, who was a newspaper man. I believe he wrote for the Democrat at the time.
He did. He wrote for the Democrat. He did. And then right after that, I think of course the White Citizens Council was involved in all of that. And in your book, so that afternoon they put out a bulletin around town. This is White Citizens Council. This is in your book.
Yes.
It said, if you want Marianna to be a battleground, you can get it. You can look for the same medicine as you got a taste of today every time leaflets are passed out. No more food stamps will be signed by white people as long as this is going on. And in all caps, this is our last warning. All you red-blooded whites, come to the aid of your town. So that was the White Citizens Council.
It was, but it was not frightening at all. And here's the thing, why in my older age, I say that somebody had some sense on the white side. We did not have the full gathering of the folk from Mississippi. Very early in the game, folks from Forest City came down, but they stopped coming. Now, I don't know who caused that. We didn't kill nobody, didn't shoot nobody, but it stopped. Now, we were prepared to do some shooting. I don't want to tell you, I don't want to mislead you today, that we were just going to be angels and turn the other cheek. We were prepared to do some shooting, but it never occurred because we didn't have all those folks in Little Rock, for example, in '57. They had folks from all over the state and all over Mississippi coming into Little Rock to help straighten these black folks up. That did not occur in Marianna. We dealt with Marianna people primarily. There was a person who came and spoke to the Citizens Council to tell them how to get rid of us. But that person was more of a teacher than a participant. He did not spend any time in Marianna. I can't remember what his name was. But there were three people in Marianna who were leaders in the White Citizens Council. That was Harold Means, Jess Heron, and W.H. Barker. They were the officers. They filed a lawsuit to stop the funding for the clinic. They Harold Means he owned a little hotel there, the Sands Hotel. He started off sitting out in front of the clinic, writing notes, and we physically ran him away from out there because we decided we weren't going to take it no more. We weren't going to tolerate that. And I don't know what happened there. Who told him? Maybe he did have a legal right to be parked on the street. He was not on the clinic property. I don't know who told him. Maybe he ought to leave that alone. But I think it was wonderful advice, because this was not the time. Marianna would have been off the map. You would have been talking about a town that used to exist, I think, had things been pushed, because there were 3 or 4 young people involved with us who had been to Vietnam, who had been involved over there in the trenches, who were just not willing to be treated like, I mean, they had read about what happened to black folks coming back from World War II. My daddy was in World War I. And of course, I knew he told me about his experiences, how they treated him when he came back to Mississippi at the end of World War I. And we were just not willing to tolerate that. For whatever was right or wrong, we were not willing to tolerate it. And I believe that if we're going to find some semblance of justice in our country, that my white friends really do need to try to figure out what the black experience was like, not from somebody who's trying to give them the story they want to hear, but somebody who just tells them the truth of the matter, as much as I'm trying to do. And I certainly don't say that my book is the only story. My book is, I think I was a little bit unusual. But there are many people out there who could tell you about this. I was surprised, he died a few years ago. I was surprised at how vigorously a young PhD up at Jonesboro could present this story we're talking about here. His name was Calvin Smith, Dr. C. Calvin Smith. While Calvin understood how to play the role and be a college administrator and look and play the part, Calvin's feelings were probably as stronger than mine. And now people have a difficulty believing that, but that's what we need to understand in this country. And that's why we're going to continue to have this disorder, this resistance until we find a way. And I do recognize that there is a large contingent of people now who appear to be committed to trying to make some things right. But we have a substantial group who just are absolutely committed to making certain that things don't change too much. And my own view, I put some controversy out there because but my own view is that the big problem among many of my white friends is that they are afraid that when the demographics change in this country, when white folks are no longer in the majority, that black folk are going to misuse them much as brown folk are going to misuse them as much as they've done black and brown folk. I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong. I think, for example, I represent a good example of that. I think when I was a prosecutor and when I was a judge, I think you will find that 90% of the white folk will tell you he was fair and impartial.
Well, what you say, that's the message in the presidential campaign right now. The future is black people, brown people, they're going to take over, and it's all going to be, it's
Yes.
going to be bloodthirsty.
Yes, yes.
I think that's the message that's going out there now. But that's the other thing you said. You're right. You decided to get into politics, and I think you had 2 or 3 unsuccessful races over there, and then you ran for prosecuting attorney in the first.
I didn't actually run for prosecuting attorney. I've got to give credit for that to Jim Guy Tucker. I helped a guy get to be prosecutor. We helped a guy beat Gene Ralph. I helped Dan Dane beat Gene Ralph. And then Dan Dane served 1 full term and started his second 2-year term and then resigned. And as a part of his resignation, he got with Jim Guy Tucker, who was acting governor while Bill Clinton was running for president, and convinced Jim Guy Tucker he should appoint me as prosecutor. It was not something I wanted, though, as I say in the book. Those were emotionally and psychologically difficult jobs for me, because in my district, in the First Judicial Circuit, in at least 4 of the counties, 80% of the defendants are black people. And I spent my life advocating for black people, that is, going against the system in support of black people, challenging the system. And here I'm now the system that's sending them to the penitentiary, if you will. But I will tell you that once I got in my mind that I was going to try to do this, I also decided I was going to do it in a way that I could talk about it any way I wanted to talk about it among black folks or white folk, and that that I would feel confident that I had not tried to use the power for purposes of revenge, which is of course something that we all think of. I mean, not all of us. Some people are really superior Christians, better than I am. But some of us think about revenge sometimes. But I would not let that direct or influence how I function as a prosecuting attorney. Jim Tucker must have had, he and I have talked about this a lot. He said that he appointed me because he believed that I would do right. Three reasons. He believed that I would do right. He knew I was strong-willed, but he believed I would do right. He liked what Dan had tried to do in the district, and he believed Dan. He wanted to respect Dan's wishes that I be appointed. And thirdly, he thought it was time for Arkansas. He knew Arkansas's history, and there had never been a black prosecutor in this state until I was appointed. By the way, there has been a black person elected prosecutor, and that's a young man down in Southwest Arkansas named Carlton Jones. He's a circuit judge down there now, but he was elected 2 terms, two-year terms. Carlton's a young man, younger than I am. I guess he might be 55 or 60. But I knew him when he first got out of law school, and he's a great guy. And I still try to talk to him when I see him about how he was able to get elected prosecutor in Miller County down there, Miller and Lafayette counties. But there has been, Arkansas has now has had an elected prosecuting attorney, black prosecuting attorney by the name of Carlton Jones.
And it also has on the Court of Appeals there. I don't know whether you were the first black elected to the State Court of Appeals, but there are now, I guess, about 3 that have been elected to the Court of Appeals.
Yeah. Andrea Rolfe, Wendell Griffin, myself, and the young man who's there now named Wayman Brown.
Wayman Brown.
One black person on the Court of Appeals. His name is Wayman Brown. He's from Pine Bluff. And,
we've got about 3 minutes left. I just wanted to let you all know.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Olly, there are a couple of remarks on here. I thought I'd read somebody from Deborah Sutler. Judge may be older, but he still has that fire about injustice. Phyllis Hammonds, thank you for your voice throughout the years. I am in Phillips County, Helena, West Helena, still fighting, looking at your brother's pick. Prentice Neal holding his sign in 1971, Make Whites Right, that Rogerlyn Johnson book. And there are several other comments like that in there. So anyway, well, Olly, we could go on and talk about this for hours, and everybody can read this book and get hundreds of other stories that we haven't talked about here. Olly, anything else you'd like to?
I appreciate you. I appreciate all of you. I really hope that there's at least some understanding. I know that sometimes I come on with some statements that make some people uncomfortable. But the fact of the matter is that I believe that the only way we're going to figure out how to make our country what it ought to be, that is, as described in the Constitution, equality for all, is that we understand at least where we're starting from. We're not starting from a situation where you and I were perfectly equal in terms of our opportunity for fair play in you. We're coming from a point where the substantial percentage of us, particularly us black people, were always subject to your whims and attitudes. And while you may not have personally felt anything, the fact of the matter is that the system drove what occurred. And so we were subject to what the system drove. And you need to understand that as you figure out how to respond to or determine whether you ought to be supportive of the Black Lives Matter, for example, or some other kinds of efforts to make this country what it ought to be and what it says it's going to be.
All right, good wrap up. So Brad, Heather, is this it? Are we through? Judge, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you.
Yes, thank you all very much. This was terrific.
Judge and Mr. Dumas, hang on for just a second, and
Okay.
we'll chat for a second after we get everybody off.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's see. Well,
I'm here. I'm coming back.